people like me. You need people like me so you can point your f***ing fingers and say, that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
Welcome to the mother relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
Might fight Pitbull, because that's who Tank fight. Flat-footed, come forward, throw a lot of punches so he can set him up for shots. I do believe he'll fight that guy. And he don't fight guys with belts that when the belt holder is a boxer. He'll fight a boxer. He'll fight a dude with a belt that's a Mexican that fights come forward, throwing a lot of punches so they can be set up for the shots. Yes, he'll fight any dude with a title that's Mexican or that comes forward. If they're not Mexican, they come forward slugger. He fights those type of fighters. I believe that fight's possible, no question. The fight I don't believe is Frank Martin. No, I don't believe he's fighting Frank Martin. Now, I still ain't seen nothing solid. I ain't seen no training camp. I ain't seen nothing on that. I ain't even seen a confirmation that they fight. Like I said, I don't believe it. Should I see him in the ring?
Listen to me. Did you not see Frank Martin on Cigar Talk?
Hey, look, we saw Keith Thurman all the way up until the week before, and he didn't get to fight.
Spirited and intuitive caller that called into the Boxing Voice to speak to Nestor Gibbs his suspicions that Gervonta Davis won't face Frank Martin because he's a deviation from the kind of fighter that he normally faces, in spite of reports that Gervonta has indicated his fight with Frank Martin is now being planned for June 22nd instead of the 15th.
Caller doesn't think it's going to happen.
In spite of reports indicating that it will, June 22nd at the Toyota Center in Houston, Texas, Frank Martin's neck of the woods.
Caller doesn't think it's going to happen.
He raised a lot of valid points that in spite of these reports that are out there were reports out there that Keith Thurman was going to fight Tim Tszyu just for him to pull out at the very last minute. So something similar could be true of a Frank Martin fight because Frank Martin is not the kind of fighter you normally see Gervonta Davis in there with. And even if I don't completely agree, I do understand.
You normally see Gervonta Davis in there with Hispanic fighters. Normally.
And normally those fighters are fighters of Mexican descent, whether it's an Isaac Cruz or a Leo Santa Cruz, a Ryan Garcia.
Hector Garcia was from the Dominican Republic.
It's all a part of Gervonta Davis' overall gimmick. Matching him with a lot of Hispanic fighters, particularly Mexican fighters, is a veiled effort to try to get the Mexican fight fans to rally around those fighters so that it shows up in the numbers. The gate receipts, the pay-per-view buys. By now it's not a secret that Mexican fight fans spend a lot of money on boxing. That's why Canelo Alvarez makes so much money.
It's deliberate.
But just putting Gervonta Davis in there with any nondescript Hispanic fighter or any nondescript Mexican fighter, it's not going to generate the same numbers that Canelo Alvarez regularly generates, though it doesn't stop them from trying.
That's what the caller's talking about.
Mexican fighters and flat-footed fighters that like to come forward. He wasn't taking a shot.
No, he wasn't taking a shot at Mexican fighters. What he's highlighting is the matchmaking.
Which I've often brought up myself, that they matched Gervonta Davis against a very specific kind of fighter. The kind of fighter that he doesn't have to chase, that he doesn't have to pin down due to his limited stature, that he's a very short and stumpy fighter, doesn't have much reach.
They don't put him in there against boxers.
Pure boxers, like Shakur Stevenson, like Devin Haney. Those are the kind of fighters you never see Gervonta Davis in there with. And the kind of fighters you usually see him in there with are Hispanic fighters for marketing purposes, and aggressive fighters, volume punchers that step into their jab
as opposed to staying behind it, like Shakur does, like Devin does.
These are the kinds of fighters that would expose Gervonta Davis's deficiencies, his limitations, because he has the exact same base style as Teofimo Lopez, as Regis Prograis, with the same limitations, but you'd never know it due to the matchmaking.
Oh, so?
What all three of those guys got in common is that they're all boxer punchers, but more specifically, they're counter punchers. They rely heavily on the counter,
allowing the opponent to step into their shots so they can catch them on the way in. And when they do, they can then move in and put punches together. All three of these guys do that.
But Teofimo and Regis their deficiencies have been exposed against moving targets. Teofimo's against Sandor Martin, and more recently against Jermaine Ortiz. Regis is against Danielito Zorrilla, and more recently against Devin Haney.
Where Gervonta's are disguised, hidden.
They don't put him in there with boxers, and they don't put him in there with moving targets. They put him in there with guys that are going to step into their jab and come to him. Guys who don't manage the distance or keep distance, they close distance, which allows him to walk them into punches.
It's obvious. It's becoming more and more obvious to more people.
While Gervonta's supporters try to gaslight the boxing community at large by talking up these hapless and inept fighters that Gervonta Davis normally fights, their delusion
That he's facing the best guys around.
Not everybody's falling for it. People are starting to notice the pattern with Gervonta Davis, and that's why that particular caller is skeptical as to whether or not he's going to actually face Frank Martin, when Frank, in some ways, is a deviation from the kind of fighter that Gervonta normally faces. To that, I'll say this.
I understand.
But need I remind you that Frank Martin is not some high-risk, low-reward guy. He isn't. He's the guy who ducked Shakur Stevenson last year. That's what he did, quite shamelessly. He ducked him. He's the guy who arguably lost to Artem Haratunian in his last fight last year. That's who he is.
Artem Haratunian only had 12 professional fights going in.
Frank Martin is 29, going on 30 years old. That's what you're looking at. What you're looking at is a 29-year-old prospect.
Jesus.
I don't want to talk him down completely. He has some ability, but he looked quite human in his last fight, and I have no doubts that's why Gervonta Davis landed on him. What is the lesser of two evils? That he's not a carbon copy of the guys you normally see Gervonta Davis in there with, but he still is the lesser of two evils. He still is the safer choice, the safe choice, than, say, a Stevenson fight or a Haney fight.
Stylistically, those fights would be a nightmare for Gervonta Davis.
And don't bring up sparring stories about Gervonta Davis sparring these guys when they were just kids, when they were fucking kids, and he was in his early 20s.
They're younger than he is.
They were. A lot has happened since then. A lot of time has passed, and those same younger fighters have amassed their own professional experience. So, the caller sees what we see, more or less. But he doesn't believe that Tank is going to fight Frank. He believes he'll probably fight Isaac Cruz.
I do too.
After the Frank Martin fight. He'll go back up to 140, and now that Isaac is a champion, he'll challenge him for his WBA title. Isaac has more of a profile now. You know, he's got about 1 million followers on Instagram.
Wow.
When they first met, Isaac was little more than a nondescript fighter and a late replacement. Now he's got a bit more of a following, and the second fight could do more buys than the first one did.
Because the first one didn't sell shit.
When the bar is set so exceptionally low, almost anything is an improvement. And that's what I think he's going to do. He's going to fight Frank, then he's going to move back up in weight and take on Isaac. It's all very predictable. Isaac, who I just mentioned, Isaac himself, the newly crowned WBA super lightweight champion, is open to a Gervonta Davis rematch. Of course he is. But he also mentioned Devin Haney and Subriel Matias showdowns.
Sounds good.
When asked about the chain at the post-fight press conference, Cruz's father and trainer, Isaac Cruz Sr., who used to be a boxer himself, he didn't hold back. We made him eat his words, the elder Cruz said. We trained hard and did what we planned. As far as the chain goes,
What chain?
Broly Romero had a chain made where Isaac Cruz, in the image of a dog, was the pendant. He showed it off before the fight. It was good for a laugh until he got knocked the fuck out. In any event, Isaac's father, Cruz Sr., said he can keep it because that is a lifelong reminder of the beating my son gave to him. As for his future plans, Cruz didn't rule out any opponent. He said that he is open to fighting anyone. The media mentioned unification bouts against Subriel Matias, Devin Haney, and Gervonta.
A Gervonta Davis fight wouldn't be a unification because Gervonta don't hold the title at 140. The title he holds is at 135.
The unifications for Isaac would be Subriel Matias fight, for Subriel's IBF, Devin Haney's WBC, Teofimo Lopez's WBO. He's not going to fight them though, so don't get your hopes up. And we've already been all through that, whether or not those fights would happen and how they might look.
Much ado about nothing because much of that isn't going to happen.
I have always said that I have no problem fighting anyone, Cruz said. It is very simple. Both sides just need to come to an agreement and we can make any fight happen. It is just a matter of negotiating a fight and coming to terms. What seems easy enough, but is becoming increasingly difficult to make a fight with an Isaac Cruz.
Ryan tried to fight him. The WBC ordered Isaac to fight Shakur.
And none of it happened. What accents the difficulty in trying to negotiate a fight with Isaac Cruz is that where Devin and Shakur headline their own shows,
right?
Subriel Matias, he's about to, in his island of Puerto Rico. Isaac is still just an undercard fighter, though you'd never know it the way that his people negotiate. The biggest win of his career, the one this past weekend, that was a co-main event, not a main event.
He turned his nose up at an offer from Golden Boy to fight Ryan, turned his nose up at an order from the WBC to fight Shakur.
All before he ever won a title, all before he ever actually won a belt. You must consider that in the subsequent 2 years that followed, his points decision loss to Gervonta Davis, he never once headlined his own show.
Jesus, 2 years. It's been that long?
It has. And even though his buzz and his profile has grown somewhat in those 2 years, he's still not a headliner. He still doesn't headline his own main events. And all the while, he was turning his nose up at offers from those guys and orders. So if that's what he was like before he won a belt, what's he gonna be like afterwards?
Here comes the nationalism.
Let me tell you something, sweetheart. Nationalism,
Yeah?
tribalism, has a place in all organized sports, including boxing, but it has no place in this conversation. I don't care if you went to school with Isaac or live next door to Isaac. I don't care if you fly the same flag as him.
You can root for him.
For whatever reason you do, but that has absolutely nothing to do with my evaluation of him, how he negotiates, and what he can and can't do as a fighter. So if that is the premise and that is the lens that you view this fighter in, then spare me.
Spare me your tribalism, all right?
All he did this past weekend was knock out a hapless boxer that I told you he was going to knock out, because I told you he was going to beat Rolly Romero like a drum, and he did.
I'm not a hater.
That doesn't convince me that he would beat Devin Haney or Teofimo or Subriel. It doesn't.
Because all of them would beat Rolly Romero.
Subriel Matias might kill Rolly Romero.
All right?
The way I see it, none of those unification matches are going to happen, though if they did, I would pick every single one of those fighters to beat Isaac. Thus, Isaac fighting them.
It's not going to happen anyway.
What might is another Gervonta Davis fight. This is why you see guys all of a sudden backing Isaac Cruz to beat Regis Prograis.
What?
This is at least in part why you see people talking up Isaac the way they're talking him up. Now, some are talking him up because they're Mexican nationals supporting the Mexican fighters, while others, for some others, these are wars by proxy.
Proxy wars.
Proxy, you ask? The authority to represent someone else, in this instance, Gervonta Davis and his resume, a figure that can be used to represent the value of something in a calculation.
What?
When you see people say that Isaac would beat Regis Prograis, for example, that's their way of saying that Gervonta's resume is better than Devin's.
That's what they're doing, or what they're trying to do.
Ultimately, we may never know if Isaac would or wouldn't beat Regis Prograis because Regis isn't on his radar. Though if you see people rushing to say stuff like this, that's why. What they're trying to get across is they think Gervonta's resume, his opponents, are better than Devin's opponents.
I don't agree.
That's what they're doing. Isaac Cruz is best described as a very crude, very simple pressure fighter. Even among pressure fighters, there are levels, there are tiers.
Isaac is in the lower tier.
Because he doesn't exhibit much head movement to slip punches, roll punches, bob and weave under punches. No, he doesn't exhibit much head movement, not really. Doesn't show much of a jab when closing the distance. He just barrels forward behind a peekaboo guard, not dissimilar from what you used to see from Mike Tyson. Then, once he's within striking distance, he wails. He starts throwing flurries, uncontrolled, disorganized combinations where sometimes the shots get in, sometimes they don't.
It's enough to wear out a Rolly Romero.
We're down to Rolly Romero, but how good is Rolly Romero? Should I jump off a cliff that Isaac knocked him out?
Calm the fuck down.
I'd pick William Zepeda to beat Rolly Romero, and he's a pressure fighter. For me and my money, he's a pressure fighter that shows more variety than Isaac, closes the distance better. I'd pick Subriel Matias to put Rolly in the hospital. I think he might kill him.
So let's not go overboard because Isaac beat Rolly. A lot of guys would beat Rolly.
Beating Rolly doesn't convince me that Isaac would beat any of the other champions at 140, and that's likely how his team is going to negotiate. Those fights, lucrative as they might be, some of them, they're too risky.
They'll just go with the devil that they know. See if they can't do the dance with Gervonta again.
Upstairs, in men's heavyweight news, it seems that veteran fighter Derek Chisora has leaked the plans for Anthony Joshua's next fight.
Not really surprising.
The natural target for AJ is the winner of the May 18th Tyson Fury versus Alexander Usyk undisputed title tilt, but with a rematch clause attached to the fight, there are doubts that Joshua will get a shot at all 4 belts next. Thus, Derek Chisora leaked that Anthony Joshua will likely face the winner of the upcoming Daniel Dubois versus Philippe Hrgovic fight set to go down on the undercard of Better Beef versus Bivol, what is the Matchroom versus Queensberry tournament.
The winner of the fight, whoever emerges, may end up facing Anthony Joshua later on in the year at Wembley on UK soil.
Turki Al-Sheikh has already revealed plans for a Wembley show in September as an international advertisement for Riyadh season, the next Riyadh season, and Joshua would be the perfect headliner for it. Moreover, it would be even more perfect if Daniel Dubois wins, if Daniel Dubois comes through the Hrgovic fight and meets Anthony Joshua in September, because then it really is a Matchroom versus Queensberry show.
You have to remember, in the upcoming tournament, the first installment, Philippe Hrgovic would be representing Matchroom and Daniel Dubois would be representing Queensberry. If Hrgovic wins and he fights Anthony in September, well, that's more or less Matchroom fighter versus Matchroom fighter.
If Daniel wins, I think it's a considerably bigger fight. That is, it would make the Joshua fight in September even bigger because they're both UK fighters. They're both UK heavyweights, and it's been long felt in the boxing community at large that Frank Warren groomed Daniel Dubois to be his own version, a Queensberry version of Anthony Joshua. Needless to say, young Daniel hasn't had all the success that Anthony has had in the heavyweight ranks, and he's not now the draw that Anthony is.
And he's not going to suddenly become that just because he beats Philippe Hrgovic.
However, I think Joshua versus Dubois is a bigger fight in the UK than Joshua versus Hrgovic. Granted that in the UK, Joshua can sell out with just about anybody. But tell me I'm wrong. Tell me that Joshua versus Dubois isn't more intriguing and wouldn't sell better on UK soil than Joshua versus Hrgovic.
I don't have a preference.
I could go for either fight. A fight between Anthony and Philippe is a fight of Olympians. You know, that's what they both are. That's what they come from. That Olympic amateur pedigree. That's a good fight. But a Daniel Dubois fight, that's good too. The anti-Joshua. That's what Frank Warren always wanted him to be.
Zaniel.
Who's riding high after knocking out Jarrell Miller, then unbeaten, stopping the loudmouth American. That'll put some hair on your chest.
Imagine if he beats another unbeaten fighter in Philippe Hrgovic. His confidence.
He would be beaming with confidence going into that Anthony Joshua fight in September. The question is, can he do it?
He's going to be facing a fresher and fitter fighter than the last fighter that he fought.
Philippe's in better shape than Jarrell Miller. I think that goes without saying, and he's a more well-schooled boxer with more of an amateur background than Jarrell Big Gravy Miller. Taller guy, longer guy, who isn't morbidly obese.
Who do you think wins?
Never really been all that impressed with Philippe Hrgovic, but this might prove to be a tougher assignment for young Zaniel than the Miller fight was.
It's a good sequence of fights.
AJ better study the tape because come September, he may have to face one of these two guys.